Oh hey, Jeremy here from Long Speed Marine. Well, today we're starting our first part in the series of paint and bodywork on the Mercury. So this is going to be covering off basically a do-it-yourself, inexpensive way. I don't want to say cheap, but an inexpensive way for you to do paint and body on your car. The big point of this is to show, hey, I'm an amateur, I'm no professional, and I can tackle this and get good results on doing the paint and body out of this. Sure, we're going to have some runs, we're going to have some issues, but we'll deal with those as we go through. But don't be afraid on your project or purchasing that project car or something because it needs paint. A lot of times I see people really nervous about, oh, I don't want to buy that car because it needs paint. But honestly, paint is one of the easier and less expensive things that you can do. If a car needs a motor and transmission, that can be thousands and thousands of dollars versus $1,000. So I'm going to go over the cost here in Canadian dollars, and it's roughly about the same in the US. I find that these products up here are like what they're worth and what they cost up here is about the same what they cost in the US. The only difference being is some of your chemicals, your paint that you can get is a little bit different than our paint and what we get. But by using the paint that I've got here, which you can get in the US, it will save you a few bucks. So I'll show you about that as we get into it. So again, I want to cover off and show you how we're going to do this inexpensively and what materials I'm using, the cost, obviously laying it out, doing all that kind of stuff, the process I'm going to take. So that's what we're going to cover off in these few series of videos. So let's jump in first with what products I'm going to use. And I want to start by saying, no, I'm not stripping the whole car down. This car has years of paint that's been on there for a long time. In order to strip all the paint off this car, it would be very expensive to do. So I don't have the budget to do that, to have it acid dipped, which is preferred. Sandblasting, I find on body panels, can really make them weak if the sandblaster goes a little bit too hard in certain spots on the car. So you'd want to get the car dipped, and that's very, very expensive to do. So doesn't need to be done on a project like this. The paint that's on there is stuck pretty good. What's on there right now is a primer that is over top of a flat black that was sprayed on there sometimes, I'm going to guess in the 70s, and then the original paint, which is this cream color. So there are some areas of concern, and I'm not going to go crazy with those either. I'm going to show you how I'm going to deal with them and go over that. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the filler and the body filler. So you have two types of filler. Now let me start by saying I'm not sponsored by any of these companies whatsoever. I paid for all this stuff out of my own pocket. I have no sponsorship with it. However, if they'd like to sponsor me, sure. So I just go down to my local auto supply store. For me here, that's Maslac, and they carry the Valspar product, which is also House of Colors. So Valspar makes House of Colors. So that's where I get all this stuff from. As far as the filler goes, I'm not picky on those. I just ask for whatever they keep in stock. So they happen to have the Evercoat product. So as far as filler goes and why filler gets a bad name, Bondo itself, which is this one here, this is your Bondo, this is your lightweight body filler, they call it. It will suck up moisture. So if you put that over top of a spot where you've got a pinhole in your weld, or there's already rust or a gap and it doesn't sit completely flat against the surface and moisture can get in behind there from condensation or any of that kind of stuff, it will eventually soak that up and cause rust, and that's why it pops. That's why you get those Bondo pops coming from this product, from body fillers. That's why it's got a bad name, because people don't use it correctly. They basically just smear it over a hole, try to fill in gaps and seams where it shouldn't be used. And this is just really meant for smoothing out the body. You've got a good, basically, structure underneath. You've got a good seal underneath to the body, and that's where you're going to use your body fillers. People may disagree with me and say different things, but anyways, that's what body filler is meant for. What you need to put on areas where you've got pinholes in the rust, or pinholes in your weld wasn't completely good and you got a tiny little hole in there and moisture may get through, or you got a little bit of rust there that you weren't able to grind all the way down and treat, and it's a little bit bumpy and porous. and condensation can get in, that's where you want to use a short strand body filler, fiberglass body filler. This stuff is waterproof. When I was in the marine business and we would make repairs on the fiberglass hulls and stuff, this is what we would use because this is waterproof, okay? So this is completely waterproof. You can put it over those. Hey, if you want to fill some holes with this, which I'm going to show you, I'm going to fill some holes with this stuff. I know, controversial, oh my God, but I'm going to do it. This is what you want to use to do that because water can't get in behind it. It bonds to the surface and creates a completely waterproof area where this stuff is. So this is what you want to use over your welds, you know, especially in this area here where I've got all these welds up here. This is what I'm going to be putting down first. I'm going to coat this whole area with that, smooth it out as best I can, and then I'm going to go over it with the body filler to smooth it out even more and get that nice smooth surface on there. So those are the products, that's the way you want to use it. Now, a tip that I saw from Bad Chad actually is he puts fiberglass resin. This is the liquid fiberglass resin, which is in here with the fillers as well. The liquid fiberglass resin will really thin this out. Again, I saw this trick on Bad Chad and I thought, man, that's awesome because this stuff can be very thick and hard to work with. So the fiberglass resin you can mix in with this. Again, I'm going to show you all this. We're going to get to that in this video here where I'm actually going to mix up some of this stuff and start putting it on the roof sections and a bunch of my other welds is what we're going to get to in this video. So stick with me here. So we're going to mix those together. The other thing that you can do with this fiberglass resin is you can use it to coat any of those areas where you've got problems with rust. This will seal up the rust and give you a fighting chance for that rust not to pop through your paint. So my front fenders on this car, which are pretty rusty because of years of being weathered and all the paint has come off it, I'm going to sand them down and I'm going to use this stuff on top of there to help seal in and coat all that rust. So that's what I'm also going to be using this stuff with, and that will be on another video. So then I want to jump into the paints that I'm going to use. So the first thing obviously that we're going to want to do after we do a bunch of this body filler is do primer. So primer you can actually do beforehand. If I wanted to now, I can go ahead and shoot primer on this car, which again, this black is primer. I can shoot primer over this, then do my body work over top of that. There's no problem doing that. You just make sure that you sand it before you go ahead and start doing your fillers. And that's basically what I have done here anyways. I shot primer all over this whole car because I showed it at an event that was outside. Didn't want rust to start and flash form on all this exposed metal, so I went and shot it with primer. And this is the primer that I use. This is the Valspar Direct to Metal DTM 2008. It is a black surfacer sealer primer. I want to use black because my goal is either to leave it in this flat black like this. I know primer shouldn't be left like that because it's porous, but I'm either going to leave it in this primer flat black, or my top coat is also going to be a color that is very, very dark. So that's why I'm using the black primer as opposed to a gray, or you get some of those yellow colors. But I'm using that because I want my finish to be dark, dark, dark. So I'm going to keep using the black primer on here. Now, some people are nervous on the black primer because they say, well, when you sand it down, can you see where your low spots are? Hopefully you can see this on camera. So I've sanded this top part and you can see it's gone a bit grayish, and then my darker spots are kind of black in there. So absolutely you can see your low spots with the black primer. And to be honest, you don't even need to use a guide coat with this because it's easier to see it in the black primer. Because it turns sort of a gray when you're sanding it down, you can see those low spots even better. And you don't need to use those guide coats that you see people using with their gray primer. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be going with a dark top coat, the black base, the black primers, if I also get a stone chip or chip all the way through, it's going to be less noticeable. So that's why I'm running black as the primer. And again, I'm using this Valspar. This stuff too, if you mix it up thick, it's also what's called a surfacer. So you hear those high build primers. Well, that can be the same thing. I can spray this basically completely non-reduced the way that it is, and it's going to be a really thick paint and give me a nice finish to sand out on there. Or what you can do is also reduce it. So I can reduce it with my Valspar reducer here for that. that also needs your activator. So you need to put your activator in here. That's really going to harden up that primer as well. So these three products go together to do the primer. Again, the more reducer that you put in here, the thinner that this is going to be and the less high build that it's going to be. Again, I'm not sponsored by any of these products. I just like them. I've used them before. Again, this black is what is that Valspar finish on there. Now, obviously, once you're all done that, you have to decide what color you're painting the car and what you're actually going to paint it with. Are you going to do a base clear, which I think is the best solution to go with, or are you going to go with a single stage? Some people think that the base clear is going to be harder to paint or harder to work with. It's not. It's actually easier because you've got a chance. If you screw up this base coat, it's easier to sand it out and redo that spot where you've got a bunch of runs. You can sand it, then spray it again with your base coat. Hopefully you've got some left, and then you can deal with those issues before you go and put the clear coat on. When you have the single stage, which is basically a gloss paint that you're putting on, it can be really hard to sand those out and polish them out. So up here, we've got the LVB R100 series Valspar paint. So what this is, up here in Canada, we need a low VOC paint, and so we can't run some of the same stuff that you have in the US. But what the good thing is this gets mixed 1-to-1. So 1 part of this, 1 part reducer. So what that means is, in this can, I've got a gallon can here, and I've got 2 quarts in this can. So essentially, I can fill the rest of this up with reducer, and now I've got a gallon of paint, and I only bought 2 quarts of paint. Some of the other stuff, it's oftentimes 2 parts of paint to 1 part reducer, depending on what it is. So this here saves you a bit of money because you're mixing it 1-to-1. It's really, really great. I'm not going to mix this up in the can. I'll just mix it up as I put it into the gun. But that's why I use this stuff here, this base coat. Works really, really well. And they've got a ton of colors. Basically, any production car color. That's another thing to talk about. That's what is actually in here, is a production car color. And what I mean by that is this is a color from a Hyundai. So it's going to be easier for you to get and touch up in the future rather than going to some of those custom colors and finishes. Sure, they're great, but again, they're a different product. You need more of it often than you do the production car finishes. And so you're going to need to use and purchase a lot more, and it can be a lot more expensive than the way this is here. So that's what I'm doing. That's sort of my recommendation, is if you've got that custom color in mind, go flip through the book, the color book, or as you're driving around, look at some different cars and goes, hey, that car is actually pretty close to the color that I want to use. So try and do that where possible. So that's the base coat. The next thing is your clear coat. I don't know what I'm going to be clearing on this car. I'll probably be clearing the roof at least. Maybe I'll do the whole car, I'm not sure. But this is the clear coat that I like to do. It's from Southern Polyurethanes, production clear coat. It makes a really, really nice gloss. It's not overly expensive. It's fairly cheap for the gallon, and you need the activator for it as well. Again, very affordable to purchase this stuff here, the production clear. Sure, it's not going to be your really, really crazy clear show car finishes, but if you work this at the end and color polish it out and all that kind of stuff, it will give you a really, really nice shine. That's what I sprayed the dashboard of this car with, and I'll throw in some of that footage now. So the dashboard that I did before in a different color, I coated in this stuff here. Turned out really, really great. I've used this on a bunch of projects that I've done, and like I say, really like it. As far as cost goes, here's my bill, and I'm going to rhyme off what it is. So the actual paint was $119 per quart of paint. So this right here, 238 bucks. The reducer medium base solvent was 100 bucks. My activator was 72 bucks. The primer, 152 bucks. Very, very affordable on that there. The production clear, 150 bucks for the production clear. And the activator that goes with it was 65 bucks. My gallon of Bondo basically is $98. The gallon of, so that's the filler, was $98. The Bondo was $83. and then some resins and some mixing cups and stuff like that that I got. So we total out for everything that I purchased was basically $1,200 when you add it all together with the tax. So $1,200, and there you go. I've got enough product here to do a really great paint job on my car, or any car. Any car for that matter. You've got enough product here that's definitely going to cover you. Now obviously you're going to need sandpaper, tape, and those kind of things. So in that I did buy some mixing cups, I bought some seam sealer, and I bought some tape in that $1,200. So that whole $1,200 has that covered. The only thing I don't have is the sandpaper, excuse me. So I don't have the sandpaper included in this. But you know, you add, let's just say another $200. So for $1,400, you'll probably have enough supplies to go ahead and paint this. Then your gun, I'll show you what gun I'm going to be using. It's an inexpensive set that I bought years ago, but you can also use, you know, any of your Harbor Freight or Princess Auto guns, that kind of stuff, to paint this stuff. So enough talking and explaining all this, but I wanted to make sure that I explained all that to you because I don't know how many folks have explained that in their actual videos of this stuff. So I wanted to make sure that I explained all the products, what I'm using, and the costs involved to be upfront with everybody of what this whole stuff is going to cost. So $1,200 going to get me a great paint job on this car. So like I said, the first thing I'm going to do is start with doing some filler on the roof here. So that's going to be our first area that we're going to tackle. So I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit, get you guys set up, and we'll be back here when we start mixing up our filler. So the other thing that you want to do that I didn't mention was you want to get yourself a good grease and wax remover. When you're in there purchasing all the rest of this other stuff, ask the fellow at the, you know, the supply place, the body shop supply, what they sell the most for grease and wax remover. There are those inexpensive ones that you can buy at, you know, the hardware store and stuff like that. I've had mixed results on those as far as grease and wax removers. So ask them what they sell for grease and wax remover, what they say guys like the best. Don't be afraid to ask those guys at the body shop supply what they find guys are preferring the best and what they're buying, because I'll tell you, those guys that do production jobs or doing collision jobs, stuff like that, they will be your best resource on what products and supplies to use because they're doing this all day long quickly too. So they know what to do. They've got a lot of trouble stuff because they're filling in. They're not starting from a stripped car. They're using products on top of other products that have been out on the road for years and years. So those guys really know what stuff to use for prep and paint and things that won't react with other products. So get their advice on what stuff to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is wipe this down with a grease and wax remover. I'm going to do that now before I start mixing this stuff up so that it really dries all that stuff out. And that's just so that we get a good adhesion to our car while we're doing the body work. So I'm just wiping this area down. It's definitely not going to hurt anything. I've taken all that dirt and stuff off there. All right, so we're going to start by getting ready to mix up some body filler. All right, so we're going to need to mix this stuff up a bit. So that's why I like to use one of these because there will be this liquid on top. Basically, that's the resin like that. That's just separated. So I like to just try and cut that in as best I can. Try and mix up some of it. Obviously too, you want to do this in a well ventilated area. This stuff is pretty strong. And depending on how old this filler is and if you've ever used it before, will depend on how much of that resin you're going to add to it, how thick this is, how dried out. Obviously this is a brand new can, so it's not as dry. Get that off. And I'll just use this to scoop out a bunch of this. And I like to use these are basically cutting boards from the dollar store. Nice plastic cutting board. I find they're easy to clean up afterwards. So this is probably going to be too much filler, but that's okay. I'd rather have too much than not enough. Scrape this off. All right. Close that back up. All right, so now I want to add my resin to this and just thin it out a bit. And again, it's all personal preference, but this is just too thick the way that it is. It's just too much, it's just too thick. We're going to start adding that much. Go from there. Try to fold this stuff in, mix it around, fold it in as best you can. Now I'm going to need a lot more than that. Definitely too much product. That's okay. So the other thing that this resin is going to allow us to do is it's actually going to allow us a little bit more working time with the product, so it's not going to harden as fast. And this is the part where you need to be patient, is the drying part. That's, you know, people talk about stuff taking a long time. This is what honestly takes the longest time, is waiting for stuff to dry and cure. So you got to make sure that you leave yourself enough time with whatever you're doing for stuff to cure and dry. All right, that's about the consistency that I think I want this. Again, I could thin this out even more if you felt like you wanted it thinner, but this is about the consistency that I'm going to want. See, it's starting to, you know, sort of run out and flatten out a little bit. Again, that's kind of the consistency that I want. So let's just get this scooped back up a little bit. And I'm going to get my hardener out. Just run a line across that. That's just usually how I measure it out. I just do a line across. And you just want to make sure that you start folding this in, getting it mixed up well. Again, I've got a bit much here that I mixed up. Get the excess off of here. I just want to fold this all together. Now guys will tell you too, you got to try and do this in a way to get these air bubbles out so you're not folding in air and doing all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Sure. I'm an amateur. What do I know? I can still see some of that blue. So again, we're just mixing, sort of folding this all up. Like I said, I kind of like these, we can manipulate these boards a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to start putting this on, so let me get you in a little bit closer here so you can see what I'm doing. All right, so now I'm just going to start applying this on to my area. Not too thick. Spreading this out. Now, keep in mind, the more you put on here, I'm making a mess here, the more you put on, the more you're going to have to sand off. So, oh, that was gross. Gosh, I'm making a huge mess. So this is pretty runny. So, like I said, the more you put on, the more you're going to have to sand off. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're putting this stuff on, that you're going to have to sand off all this stuff. And obviously we're going to need to do more than one coat. The hope is this is the only coat of this filler, and then that we've got our, basically our height where we want it. We've got the seam filled in pretty good, and then we can go after the fact with our body filler and then smooth all this stuff out. All right, so there's a certain point where you're going to want to keep messing with this stuff. And what you will end up actually doing is screwing yourself up. One of my buddies taught me that a while ago, that there's a certain point where you just got to realize it is what it is and quit screwing with it. So I'm going to want to mess with this, but I'm going to try not to. I know that I've got still pretty big low spot here in the middle, where the two roof panels came together. But at some point here I'm going to have to stop messing with this, because otherwise I will screw myself up. All right, so now I got to clean myself up. Going to wait for all this to harden, and then we'll be back to give it a sand and then do the next coat of whatever we feel needs to be done next, whether it's another coat of this filler or if it is right into the bodywork. And what will dictate that is how deep some of our valleys are here on the actual roof. So I'll see you back here in just a bit after I clean all this stuff up. Oh, and what will clean this up nicely, it's good to get a gallon of acetone because then you can clean all this stuff up. So I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we are on to the next day. I let this stuff set up overnight. You definitely don't have to. A couple hours, depending on the conditions, you know, humidity, all that kind of stuff, how warm it is in the area that you're doing it, will dictate how much this will set up and how much hardener you put into it. But anyways, this is the next day. I did go ahead and smear a whole bunch of stuff all over the rest of the car. Didn't get all of it filled, but tried to get as much as I could to get a jump on that as I was waiting for stuff to dry. So now we're on to sanding this filler down. And basically what you want to do to start off with, first I'll recommend getting a good respirator, some type of mask or something like that. You definitely don't want to be breathing this stuff in. This being fiberglass, when you start sanding it, the big chunks and stuff can definitely make you itchy. So keep that in mind. You may want to wear a long sleeve shirt, put some gloves on, whatever. I've been working with fiberglass for a while, so it doesn't really bother me. Sometimes it gets in your hand and bugs me, but it's, anyways, everybody's to each their own. I just want to let you know that because this is fiberglass, there will be some itchies, and you definitely want to wear a mask, good respirator, so invest in one of those. The other thing is this is going to get your whole area covered in dust. Everything in this shop is going to be dusty and covered. So whatever you don't want covered, your toolbox, stuff like that, go and throw a cover over it, throw some type of tarp or sheet or whatever you've got over that stuff that you don't want covered, because it will get dusty. I'm not too concerned because there's nothing really overly nice and far enough away from my toolbox. It should be okay. And I don't mind. It's been covered in dust before. But I just want to let you know that everything's going to get dusty when we start doing this. So good thing to have is a DA sander, so dual action sander. So it's not just spinning in one motion. It does wobble around. So that's what I'm going to be sanding this with, 6-inch. I only have 6-inch sanders, but if you're going to be buying one, and maybe you want to buy a couple, but an 8-inch or a larger DA will allow you to do more with the DA and less blocking, because it's a larger area on it. A lot of production body shops that are doing stuff don't even go to the blocking step. They just use a DA, and they're good enough with it that they can get the panel nice and smooth without having to go to the blocking stage. But the blocking stage will really help you get larger areas like this one smoothed out a little bit better and look even. But for this, I'm going to be using my 6-inch. The other thing to keep in mind too is there's the hook and loop, which is basically the Velcro ones, and then there's the stick-on ones. So this is the Velcro backed, but when I get into sanding my actual Bondo, basically when I'm smoothing that stuff out, the body filler itself, the Bondo, that I will want to use a sticky back, because this extra little bit, the cushion from the Velcro actually makes it less hard. So it's not as hard as a surface, so you can get little divots in there. Again, it depends on the finish that you're going for. If this is all you have with the Velcro, man, go nuts and do your thing. But just the ideal is when you're going to the finish steps, especially when you're going to be sanding out the primer before paint, a sticky back versus the Velcro back is what you're going to want. So I can show you that, what I have for a DA for that. Okay, so this is the one that I have here. So this is just your sticky back, so it sticks onto, and see it's a smooth surface here. So that's what I have. I got this one here from a good friend of mine, an old friend of mine who was just getting out of it, says I'm not going to be building any cars anymore, and I got a lot of his tools from him. And I didn't already have one of these, so he said, here you go, here's one of those. So this is a good oscillating one, decent sander to have, especially for doing your finishing and stuff like that. It's a nice heavy sander, so you don't have to apply weight to it. You just let the pressure of this sand it out. So this is what I'll be using when I go on to the Bondo stage. But now, just for getting this stuff done, I'm going to use my palm sander with that. So I will have, I've got 60 grit for this, so that's what I'm going to be using. Obviously the rougher the better is going to get through this quickly, and that's, a lot of folks hate doing this sanding step because it is time consuming, but if you use the right tools and the right grit sandpaper in the right areas, it'll make this go a lot faster. So a 60 grit sandpaper or an 80 grit sandpaper is going to make this step go a lot faster, and I don't care about the little scratches. I'm not worried about that, because again, we're going to be having another filler step with the Bondo, and then we're going to be on to our high build primer. We're going to be mixing up our primer as a high build, so that'll be later in the step. So first thing I want to do is I want to knock all this stuff down. I want to make sure that I get the edges down so that the edges are smooth. I don't want any of these rough edges. Make sure they smooth all this stuff out, and don't stay in one spot too long. So that's what we're going to start doing. I'm talking through this now because I'm going to be wearing a mask, so it's going to be hard for me to talk and explain as I'm going through this. And I'm not going to bore you with all the sanding. I'm just going to get started and show you what I'm going to do and how I'm going to handle these curves. And then, you know, it'll just be up to you folks to obviously read between the lines and do your own thing. This is, like I say, just going to take a lot of sanding to get this done. And I'll show you back here once we're done sanding this, but you can watch along as I'm doing these curves and trying to make all of these transitions and not gouge any of this stuff out. So enough talking, I'm going to get ready and start sanding this out. So the other thing too that I want to say quick, obviously I'm using air powered and it's pretty taxing. I do have a bigger compressor, but it's even pretty taxing on this compressor. If you are purchasing these, try and get an electric one. The electric ones are going to work a lot better because you're not fighting a smaller compressor, because I imagine most folks at home are not going to have a large compressor. And like I said, even mine, it's pretty taxing for it. It'll run the whole time I'm running this thing sanding, and it gets pretty hot. So keep that in mind if you are going out and purchasing these, and I've even thought about it. I may go and purchase some electric one of these, because it'll make life a little bit easier. All right, so there's our first sand done. And so one of the biggest things, when you see metal come through, stop sanding. You don't want to go any farther because that is a high spot and your filler is the low spot. So obviously I've got a lot of that here. I know that I had a lot of distortion here in doing all this and manipulating it to get it to fit. So obviously I'm going to have lots of highs and lows in this, and I'm going to have to transition this out nicely. The next step that we're going to need to do is go to body filler. Sure, you could try and fill in some of these deeper low spots with the fiberglass filler, but there's no point. I've got a good, base to go off of now. I'm pretty, I'm getting there. I'm pretty close to where I want to be. There's obviously going to need to be a lot of shape in here. I can feel that this is flattened out, and you can see it by my filler being flat. So I'm going to have to bring a lot of shape back to this. And I say a lot, it's still, I maybe only have, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch of filler on this part. It's not a lot. I mean, we're not talking pounds of this stuff on here. And even my body filler, again, I may only have another 1/8 of an inch or so on here of actual body filler. So there's really not a lot of filler in this. And again, being an amateur, doing a chop like this, obviously I'm going to be using more filler than a pro would at shaping all this stuff out, because I really didn't spend a lot of time hammering all this stuff out because my skills aren't that great. Okay, so basically what you saw me doing is making sure that I kept this moving. I don't want to hold this straight, obviously, because this is rounded. So I want to make sure that I'm moving around on this. I still have a little bit that I need to get out in this spot down here. So I'll just make sure that I'll go like this. What you never want to do is sort of what you saw me doing is dig in the edges of this. Now again, it's okay on this curve here because I have no choice. So I can dig this edge in and just sort of feather all this area out here. But you don't want to be doing that on your flat spots. I did it a little bit here because I just wanted to get that ridge off of the edges, but I know that I need to take my Bondo now and go all the way from that side up to basically up. I'll probably go up around here with it and fill a larger area so I can smooth more of this out and get a nice smooth thing. So you want to make sure that you're moving around on all these curved spots and getting it that way. On the flatter panels on that, you don't really need to do that. You can just go back and forth. This flatness of the sander will take care of that for you. But on these curved rounded panels, we want to keep moving. Thanks for tagging along on this one. I hope this helps you out. Again, this is the first part in a long line of videos that we're doing here on painting my 51 Merc, and this will apply to any vehicle that you want to paint. And hey, hopefully this will inspire you to get out there, paint that car, buy that project that maybe needs the paint job, because really, this is more labor intensive but less costly than, say, repairing an engine or replacing a transmission, something like that mechanical wise. This is just labor intensive, and hey, I don't know about you, but my labor is essentially free. And up here in Canada, we got all winter to do this kind of stuff. So thanks very much. Make sure you hit that subscribe, smash the like, leave me a comment on what you would do differently here, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.